Hello, and welcome to Adventures in Learning Design, a series of conversations about ideas, principles, research and practice, exploring how we can make learning more effective and more enjoyable, whether that's in the workplace, at school, at university or at home. My name's Laurie Harrison.
And my name's Tim Gifford.
And we're both co-founders of LearnJam, a digital learning agency and consultancy. Episode 2. What does a learning designer do? Tim, remind me what we covered in this one.
Happy to. We talked about a lot, Laurie. We talked about why you need to tell your client that they are wrong sometimes. And we compared a learning designer to a film director and somehow managed to advocate drawing on walls in the process.
So we've talked about it in kind of abstract terms and used analogies. Let's get real now.
Yeah.
What does a learning designer actually do?
A lot of different things. Certainly in my experience of it, and I think yours as well, like it touches so many different disciplines, so many modes, for want of a better word. And like the worst way of putting it is like it requires so many different hats, right? So in a particular order, a learning designer has to advocate for the learner, has to be almost like a product manager role, like advocating for the end user and making sure that all decisions, resources are directed in delivering optimum value to the end user. Like to step way out into a whole like different domain. Like there's product manager DNA in there, right? Which means for a learning designer, spending time interacting with, asking questions of end users, observing, getting to really understand them. We've talked about understanding like motivations, like reasons, all that sort of stuff, what they're trying to achieve and why. But taking that and vocally advocating for that in all of the decisions that happen throughout the development of the course. So there's the strand of that DNA in there. There's also a bit of content creator work, being able to think about what is the content that's required here? What does it need to do? What might that look like? I will need to create some of that to exemplify where I see that going. So actually creating things, whether it's like texts, activities, concept check questions, like all these different things, audio, video, all the rest of it, like stuff to create that a learner would engage with as part of their sort of learning activities. So there's a bit of that in there. And like having an editorial eye on it as well. There's also something around being the almost like project managery, in that you're trying to manage all of these different things and trying to like make them all make sense and meet each other at the right time, keep things moving in the right direction, make sure things are making sense, and make sure that the things that need to communicate, or the people that need to communicate with each other are, and that all of the information is flowing freely between all the parties concerned, I suppose. And there's also like just the straight up designer, a bit of creative DNA in there, like thinking about how do I solve this problem?
Yeah.
Given the resources I've got, given the time I've got, given all of these things I've established, like how do I do this? And it often requires us thinking, I don't want to say outside of the box, but I think it's like thinking really creatively. Like, what is the best way of doing this? Like, what can I learn from what's been done before? What can I learn from what's been done in completely other domains or industries for me to arrive at a solution I think really fits here? Those, for me, I think, are like the biggest parts of what you're doing, or like the biggest like skills, modes that you're operating in. It doesn't really answer the question, like, what do you do, though, does it?
Yeah, well, I guess that's the sort of foundations, isn't it? I think those are the key skills. I would also add bringing to bear what we know works in learning, and bringing that to the party, which I think you mentioned kind of being the advocate for the learner, but I think also being an advocate for the research and the evidence about what works in learning, because that can be, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, it can be quite hard to make the case for that in some cases. You've got you might have a really vocal stakeholder who has a clear idea about what this learning solution or this learning product needs to do, which might be based on commercial imperatives, for example, but which might go against what we know works in learning. And I think that's part of the learning designer's job is to bring that to the table and say, these 20-minute videos that you want to have in every lesson, with each video covering 10 different topics with really loud background music and et cetera, et cetera. Actually, that's a really terrible decision from a learning point of view. And here's why. And here's what I recommend that you do instead. Take that 20-minute video, break it into 3-4 minute chunks, mix up the format a bit. Don't have it all as the same style of video. Watch out for cognitive load. Don't have loud background music. There's all these kind of things that we know work in learning from our experience and from reading the research and stuff, that people who don't have that background would often push to include in learning products or in courses. And I think that's another key part of the learning designer's job, is to be really on the ball with that stuff and make sure that the case is made to keep things on point.
Yeah, it's true. No, I totally agree. Yeah, and I mean, I suppose weirdly, quite a lot of that involves educating client organization that you're working with.
Yeah,
based on using sort of your expertise to kind of back up, explain your rationale for why you're making those decisions.
Yeah,
like, here's why we have decided to make the decision to cut your proposed 20-minute video down to a 5-minute video, for example.
Yeah.
The reasons you just described, it's just gonna be an impediment to what we're all ultimately trying to achieve. Here's why we're asking a question that doesn't require them to actually input an answer. Here's why we're asking them to reflect on past experiences, just to activate something, to activate schemata, to get them connecting this to something they've done in the past or some mental model that they've already got. And that's why we're asking that question, and that isn't being scored. There's a reason for that, because it all builds towards something. So it's kind of, a lot of it is explaining, backing up your rationale, and defending it, standing by it. Yeah. Having said that, I've been in projects where that sort of position has been overridden, basically.
Yeah. Oh, we've all been there. Yeah. That's real life, isn't it? Yeah. You can make the case and give the rationale and provide the evidence, and then it might be like, thanks for that, but we're doing this anyway. Yeah, and there are limits to what you can do, aren't there? But I think you've got to still make a good case for it. But I think interesting point about kind of explaining or having a rationale for every decision that's made, I think is really important. And that to me comes back to when we were talking about just design at the start of this conversation. What do you mean by design? If something is designed, then every element of it has been thought about and is there for a reason. And that's what we should want to see in any learning experience or any course that we develop, is like everything. You could look at any element of it and explain why it does it like that. I think that to me is part of the job of a learning designer.
Totally agree with that.
Why do we have this multiple choice question after this video? Okay, because and there has to be a rationale there, and it has to be it's a design feature. It was something that was designed in. It didn't just kind of happen. It's like, oh, we always do it like that, or I thought it might be a good idea. That kind of stuff.
That's such a good point. That is a really good thing to pick up on, and it's fundamental to the design side of this conversation. Yeah, you're right. Like everything in the real world, let's think about like a guitar, just to go for the musical analogy. But like everything around that has been deliberately, painstakingly thought over.
Yeah,
like there are things that didn't make the cut, that were included in the blueprints, in the designs of it, and the sketches of it, that got iterated on, got left out, things that got brought in, so that the craftsman that made that guitar could stand by and say, for every tiny detail on that final product, can say, this is why I've decided to put this there.
Yeah,
I can tell the story behind everything.
Yeah,
and I think it's the same for like any design discipline, I imagine, but it's particularly for learning design, where it's all on display, and you are potentially called upon to justify your decision.
Yeah,
especially when there is potentially, coming back to the work side of this, like time, cost implications for what you're doing, right? Yeah. So especially when it comes to you see a very strong design argument for adding something in. Gets quite tricky. But I think you're absolutely right. It's the ability to defend your decision making from the perspective of, we did this because this is what makes effective learning. Which is like part of that.
Yeah. And, I guess it might be things like, why have we got all of this video in this course? Okay, as a learning designer, you have to be able to give a rationale that is based on, we've got all this video in this course because it will help learning because of X, Y, and Z, rather than we've got all this video because it looks cool and it's really fun to make video, which is often the reason that courses have expensive video in them, And as a good learning designer, you might need to be in a position where you say, it would be really cool to have a load of video in this, but actually, given what we're trying to achieve here, we don't need it.
Yeah.
And actually, it might be counterproductive. We might be better off with some short texts and some questions and maybe a bit of audio. So yeah, I guess it's kind of like you said, arguing for the learner and for what we know works in learning, whatever that may be, rather than what we've always done or what we assume or what the highest paid person involved kind of wants or what might be fun to do or what just seems cool. And I think a lot of digital learning products particularly suffer from that. It has I don't know, animation, video, gamification because you can do it and it looks cool, but can you point to a clear rationale in every case? And I think you need to be able to as a good learning designer.
Yeah. Totally agree. Digital products, very well, and I use this visually designed digital learning products hide often a multitude of inadequacies.
Yeah,
it's a great thing to look at. It's beautifully visually designed, like I say, and feels great, looks great. I've seen several products where that has been enough.
Yeah,
right. That's it. That's job done.
Yeah.
If you look under the hood, as it were, pedagogically, learner center wise, they're often sort of wanting. But I think what it comes down to is, if I can make huge sweeping generalizations, is to continually asking why. Why is this here?
Yeah.
Asking that of yourself. Why are we doing this? Why is that there? What could be better? And being able to, at a moment's notice, explain same to anybody who needs to know.
Yeah, well, we've set ourselves a bit of a challenge there, haven't we? I think I like that. So it's that, I guess it's that sense of accountability, isn't it, for every decision that's gone into that learning product or service or course or whatever it might be, and that as the learning designer you should be accountable for that and able to give a good rationale.
Yeah.
I guess that's a kind of an ideal that you'd be able to do that for every single element of your course or whatever it is. Something to aspire to.
Absolutely, and the fascinating thing that when you start doing that and start moving more towards that, you find yourself engaging with the micro and the macro of this as well, right? So, and this is something that I find really fascinating about the practice of learning design is that in one conversation you're talking about curriculum programmer level design. So you're thinking about how do these huge concepts, topics, these huge wedges of information knowledge, how do they connect and why are they there and what do they need to do? So you're asking questions at that level.
Yeah.
And you can kind of zoom down to almost like a quantum level, which is, why is that text that color? Was it red as opposed to blue, whatever? Why is that particular image positioned there?
Yeah.
Or why is that image? Why isn't it something else? So, you find yourself zooming in and out of these.
No, you're right. It's a real, you've got really, really a vast difference there. Yeah, it might be all the way from, how does someone best develop emotional intelligence or something, whatever, it might be a course topic, down to, what would be a good multiple choice question to test understanding of this concept, and what would be two good distractors to include in that multiple choice question. Really granular, nitty gritty stuff, and applying your expertise to both of those levels. Yeah, in terms of designing a learning experience or a learning product.
But that's what I love about it. I think that's what I find the most invigorating part of it is that you get a chance to touch all of those different parts of a course or a product, right? So you can look at particular, let's take a mobile learning app, for example, like a micro learning app. You can look at a particular screen on a mobile learning app, and you're so well acquainted with every tiny bit of detail on there. Like, I know where the image came from and why we chose it. I know why we set that question and why we chose that particular question type for this. Like, I know why we chose that color. Like, you can see the detail of it, but then you can also zoom right out and say, I know how we got all of these things to connect, how we're telling a story between these modules, these topics, and how all those learning objectives all work and how they all ladder up. And you get a chance to like influence the whole thing. I mean, to choose another incredibly far-fetched analogy, kind of feels like film director mode, right? So you've got like, you can see the whole movie, but you can also see in every single frame, every shot, I can see the decisions that we made to position lighting, actors, extras, scene, music, like all of those things. Like I can tell you a story about why we did that. I'm also discovering that maybe I should move into film and music. As a
I think you should. Clearly, this is you're crying out for this. Cry for help, Tim.
Music videos.
Yeah, it's another good analogy, though, isn't it? Yeah, film director, because in that, and then you have your the sort of the constraints, set by the producer and the studio. Okay, here's your budget. It's like, okay, it would be what I really would want to do for this scene is, I don't know, have a jumbo jet flying across the field or whatever, but actually we can't do that. So because the budget won't allow for it. So I'm going to have to be pragmatic here and come up with a creative other way of achieving what I want with that scene.
Exactly.
But still achieve as close as I can to the desired outcome or goal.
How do I get that response in the same way?
Yeah.
How do I hit that plot point in the same way?
Yeah, because no learning designer is given, an unlimited budget and time. It's like, okay, you have constraints to work within. Here's your budget, here's your time frame, here's some stakeholder requirements that have to be met. We have to work within that context. And that's part of the interesting creativity of learning design is, okay, within those constraints and based on my understanding of the learners and what they're trying to do, and based on my knowledge of what works in learning, what's the best approach at the macro level? And then, like you said, right down to the micro.
And actually, like the whole film thing isn't that far-fetched. It's not that far removed, right? I mean, something that we do regularly as learning designers is storyboarding.
Yeah.
So it's this, this way of, or the practice activity of getting a big grid, big board up on the wall and actually plotting out like the flow, the journey of the course. Working out what is, how do we get from here to you start with the end, right? Like that's where we want to get to. That's where we want the learner to be by the end of this. We have this much time or this opportunity in which to do that. How do we get to that point? And you start moving stuff around. And again, that's for me a really enjoyable part of the process. You actually, it's really, because it's a really tactile one where you're moving post-its around, you're putting learning objectives on the wall, you are putting sort of content ideas on the wall, putting sort of principles, learning principles to support them. You're moving stuff around and it's starting to take shape, right? And you're ultimately telling a story, the storyline, a through line that you're trying to hit. And so not a million miles off with the story, with the movie metaphor.
Adventures in Learning Design was brought to you by LearnJam. To find out more about what we do and who we do it for, come and pay us a visit at learnjam.com.